What looks like a nice stockinette hat with a 1x1 ribbing is actually a double knit hat, reversible on both sides. That means it's double thick for cold climates, and it's made especially on this double knit round knitting loom that rotates. This is from Knitting Board, and we'll be making this pattern today here on GoodKnit Kisses, brought to you by Knitting Board. Welcome to GoodKnit Kisses. We're all about helping you stitch your love and love your stitches. To make our double knit hat, we are working with stockinette stitches that are double knit and also the chunky open rib. Now this imitates a 1x1 ribbing. On the reverse side, it doesn't actually look like 1x1. It almost looks like a 2x1, but it's not. And so in order to get this look, what we're doing is we're using a part of a color from a long color changing yarn, such as one like this rolled up into a cake, and then we work the rest of it in either stripes, or you can use a complete solid color up here. So in this particular one, we're going to be using this bright color here, and then you can actually put together these other colors from here, or you could use a solid color here and then pop in something that has short color changes, like a nice striping yarn, self-striping, or a solid. To make your double knit hat, you're going to need a KB rotating double knit loom, and this is a one of a kind. This is the only one that does it. There's also a topper. If you want to have more than 52 stitches, you can get the loom topper as well. I'll link to everything down in the description below. You're also going to need a loom pick. You'll need a crochet hook for finishing out the brim, a tapestry needle for weaving in the ends, the measuring tool, measuring tape for making sure you have the right length, some scissors, a couple of stitch markers, and then I like to use a counter, a row counter, and that's especially important for this brim, and then if you do want to work the stripes. Let's talk about yarn and the options for making this hat differently. This pattern is actually called the Cranberry Brim Beanie, and working it with the Bernat Pop Lipstick on My Collar color. I've also worked it in a different color from the Bernat Pop line over here, so you can see how very different it is depending upon the color choice that you make. If you want to try working a solid color on the bottom and some kind of other striping yarn here that's got shorter stripes, make sure that you're using something of the same weight. This is also medium 4 weight, but you want to have something from that same yarn line so it feels the same and the bulk is the same, because these two together wouldn't actually pair very well together. So you want to make sure and test those out beforehand. But it is just a 4 weight yarn. Be sure and click down below on the link to get your pattern and also to get all your supplies. See you in a moment. All right, we're going to start dividing up our yarn. This is using the long color changing yarn, and if you're not going to be doing this, obviously you can just start working with whatever your first color is. I'm going to come over here and just cut it. Okay, and you can go ahead and divide up the other colors as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out the dark and the light gray. Just pull them right out and set aside this other one. We're not using that at all. And then the dark gray and the light gray are being separated. Just cut that. Now there are some color changes that happen and it bleeds into, and it's a little bit dark. Say this one looks mainly dark gray here, and then this is a little bit dark color pop here. If that bothers you, you can cut it out. But I will say that there is some transfer of other colors throughout here, so you might see little pops of red or other darker colors, and that's just the nature of this particular yarn. So it's imperfect, and that's the beauty of it. So it may have these little pops of color in other places. So I've got my colors separated. I'm going to set these two aside and work with my brim color first. All right, so I pulled out the center of this yarn, and there's a bright pink inside, so I'm going to go ahead and cut that, and yours might be the same. It's not much to get rid of. Now you can actually use this for the anchor yarn, and you can see I've got a contrasting color here, so we are going to need a length of anchor yarn. You're just going to measure around the outside here and go ahead and cut it off, and then you can tie it together in a little knot, still keeping it a large enough circle that it will go in between these two looms here, and set it aside. We're going to put on the first round here. All right, with the cranberry color, we're going to place it right on our loom, and I want to put a marker on here because it's very hard to see. There is an arrow On one of the legs, you'll see a little arrow on the front and the back. This is the outer loom, this is the inner loom. I'm just gonna take a stitch marker and place it so I can really see it. And then I also want to place another stitch marker back behind it so I know that this is the one peg and this is the one peg. Now I'm gonna go ahead and mark something for our brim that we're gonna be working. It's called the chunky open rib stitch, and so I'm gonna mark it on the third peg in the back. 1, 2, 3. We're going to do a stockinette cast on, and we're going to work 2 rounds of stockinette, wrapping it, and then we will start on the chunky open rib. So for now, we're going to make a slip knot. However it's easier for you, go ahead and work that. Place the tail on the inside on the first peg. Tighten it up a little bit, not too tight. All right, I'm going to hold on to that tail. It gives me a bit of an anchor. And we're going to wrap around this peg here. This is the number 1 peg. So go around the number 1 peg. So we've got the slip knot on the one on the front and the slip knot on the inner loom. And we're going to go around on the outer loom on the second peg and pick up the second peg on the inner loom. Go to the front and go to the third peg, go to the back and go to the third peg. We're not twisting any of our stitches, just going around in a serpentine motion. So just go around and one motion. You can work to the right or you can work to the left. It doesn't matter. This is the same pattern all the way around. All right, pause your video. I'll meet you back up at the very beginning. All right, so I've gone all the way around and I've pushed down all of my stitches here. And now I want to set my working yarn down, pull up my anchor yarn that we created with this loop, and we want to place it in between these 2 looms here, just right on the inside, and just lay that down. And then I want to go in between where my working yarn is and my first stitches, and I'm going to push this down in between. We can just grab our crochet hook and pull that in. Just pull my crochet hook right up in between, pull down. Okay, make sure this is all on the inside of the loom. Okay, so our anchor yarn is going to stay inside here, and it's going to help us create this nice little edge here, this crocheted edge for a really pretty finish, okay? Because otherwise your loops are going to be loose on the outside of this ribbing. All right, now that we've done that, we just have one more time around with the stockinette stitch. You're going to come from this last peg, which is number 52, or if you're using the topper, whatever that number is, I don't remember. And then you're going to go around the outside of the loom here on peg 1 and go up to peg 1 on the inside loom, or the inner, and come around and down to number 2 and do it again. Same thing. Just continue wrapping, okay? Pause your video. When we get back, I'll give you the next step. See you in a minute. All right, I went on my last peg, just up and around and down, and then we want to lock this in by taking our loom tool, and let me see, I'll turn it around so you can see the inside. We're just lifting up and over and knitting that like that, okay? So we're going to knit over all of these loops here. So we're knitting the bottom loop over the top loop, okay? All of them. Lifting up and over. And then you're going to take every second peg on the outer loom only. Every second peg you will lift up and move over 1. Okay, so I'm moving the second peg to the number 1 peg, and then I'm going and moving the 4th peg to the 3rd peg, and then I leave them alone. This is only after I have knitted over. So we're knitting over all stitches on the outside loom and the inside loom first, and then we move the stitches over, but we do not work them. So you will end up with 1 stitch on all pegs on the inner loom and 2 stitches every other peg on the outer loom, but leave them alone. All right, pause your video, maybe back up after you finish that step. All right, we're ready to start the actual chunky open rib stitch. I'm coming from the last loop on the inner peg. I'm going around peg 1 on the outer loom. then I'm going to go right up to number 3 on the inner loom. So the straight back from peg 1 is peg 1 in the inner loom, and then count over 2, 3. And that is one that I had you mark with a stitch marker earlier if you do that. So you can come here and then pick up on that 3 and then come down to the peg that has the next 2 loops on it. So we're picking up, making 3 loops on each peg in the front that has loops. We're going to come around 3, and then now we're just going to be picking up every other peg on the inner loom and every other peg on the outer loom. So come around this one here, come down to where we've got loops, go up, make sure you're skipping, go back and forth, skipping, and go all the way around, and we're going to be picking up all the loops we missed on the inner loom, and then the outer loom will actually end up getting 4 loops. So pause your video and I'll see you at that point. All right, so at the beginning again, I'm at the last peg on the outer loom here with 3 loops. We're going to go up and be sure and skip the very last peg on the inner loom. If you don't skip this one, then it'll mess up your next round and you'll wonder why you have an extra peg. So go ahead and skip that very last peg. We're going to go to peg 1 on the inner loom and then come down to peg 1 on the outer loom and wrap on that. And now we're going to pick up peg 2 on the inner loom and then come back down to peg 2 on the outer loom. And it'll look like this. You're going to have 4 stitches on the outside pegs, and then every other one is completely empty. And then on the inside, every other one, you're picking up those. So you'll have 2 loops on all the inside pegs. So go ahead and pick up all those stitches, pause your video, and I'll meet you back up to show you the next step. All right, so we can put down our working yarn and we're ready to start knitting over. Go ahead and go to the inside and knit 1 over 1 on that last peg. Okay, so it looks like this. Just go ahead and work that and lock it in. Okay, and now you're going to knit over all of the outside loops. You're just going to knit over 2 over 2. Okay, so leave the top 2 loops alone and the bottom 2 loops are knit over. Okay, so be sure and only do the bottom 2 loops coming up and over the top 2 loops. And then on the inside, of course, you're just knitting 1 over 1. So all of these are just going to get knit 1 over 1. All right, pause your video and I'll meet you back up when you're ready for the next step. Well, you had just completed 1 round of the chunky open rib. Now you're just going to continue working that chunky open rib again until you have reached 12 rounds. If you want to continue on with this stitch for a whole hat, you could totally do that, but for the purposes of this, we're going to do 12 rounds in the chunky open rib, and then we'll move on to working a stockinette stitch. So after this, I'm going to show you how to make sure that it's ready to go to the next stitch, as well as changing color. So stay tuned for that, and I'll meet you in a moment. Let's go ahead and pick this back up. I'll just get you started. You're just going to go around peg 1 and then skip over to peg 3 up at the top, come down to peg 3 here, and skipping every other one in the inner loom, just as we did before. Remember, when you finish this round, skip that very last peg and move on to going to pegs 1 and 2, and then go on, pegs 1 and 1, and then go on to peg 2 up at the top, picking up every other stitch, and then that last one, working them 2 over 2 in the front, just as we did before, and 1 on 1 in the back. All right, pause your video. I'll see you after 12 rounds. So we're ready to go from the chunky open rib stitch to a stockinette, and so we need to take these that have been worked together and they're going to go out. So we'll just go right up to this, and we still have the double loops on here. So we're just going to take the very top loop, pick it up, and move it back over to the other side where it originally came from. So just taking the loop, moving it to the next space, and placing it. And this just prepares it to get ready for that stockinette stitch. All right, so go ahead and move over all your stitches. When we come back, we will work the double stockinette stitch. Okay, everything's ready, and after I went ahead and moved these over, this tail here was a little bit loose, so I just tugged on it and it pulled through this stitch and this stitch a little bit tighter, and I just went ahead and tied it with this end here, this little tail in the new color. We're going to do the double stockinette stitch here. Now the one that I showed you before on the brim here is a stretchier one, which helps with having a rib stitch on the end, so it's almost like a flat knit stockinette. So we're going to work the double knit one. So we will be skipping every other peg, making 2 passes all the way around the loom, weaving around the loom. So we're going around the number 1 peg, go to the back, and go to the second peg. So straight across and over 1, and then come down, and you're going to go to the 3rd peg on the outer loom. So the outer loom is all the odd stitches, and the inner loom is the even stitches. So you're just going to go through and push these down first if you need to, which I do, and pick up every other one and go around the entire loom. And then at the end we need to do something a little bit different, and you want to make sure and do it like this every time. So pause your video and meet me back up at the end, and I'll show you how to move to the second pass. All right, so now I've come to the end. I've done the very last stitch in this round, and I want to come straight down and around the outside of the last peg. So we're doing both last pegs together at the same time, and then come up, and we're going to do the next pass where we pick up every other stitch. So we're going to the number 1 peg and coming down. So you should have these 3, these last 2 and plus the first peg, they're all 3 next to each other without skipping any. And then in the back, kind of moved over a little bit, you see the last stitch and then the first 2 stitches or pegs with loops on them, and then every other one. Okay, so now we're just going to come down, and on the even stitches on the front or outer loom, we'll wrap those, and the inner loom is, well, every other one, which is the odd stitches. So go ahead and pick up all of those, and when you're done wrapping, we'll pause your video and come back, and when you're done wrapping, we'll finish this up together, and I'll give you more instructions. All right, so we're at the end, and the very last stitch that I wrap is the second to last stitch. Okay, so when you start this round again to do another stockinette, you'll be jumping all the way over to the number 1 peg and then up to the number 2 peg in the same way again. So that's how you work the stockinette. So now you're just going to lift up and over the bottom pegs over the top on the outer loom and the inner loom. Oops. And there we go. So make sure and knit over this very last stitch. Turn it around so we can see that. Just knit that over so it locks it in. And I would be in a habit of working all the outside of the loom first, knitting those over, and then doing the inside of the loom. Okay, so I'll just stick my finger here on top and then knit over, and then that way it won't pop over that other one if my yarn's a little slippery or if it's a little tight. Okay. And then when you're ready, you can work on the back and then push them down. And so let's move on to the directions for what to do for the rest of this hat. Now you can continue, as I said, continue on. You can change the colors up the way the pattern has, or go straight color with all one same color. So you will need to make sure and refer to the pattern. So open the description down below, that's down below in the video, and make it bigger and read where that link is to go to the KB Looms website. And I'm going to show it here off to the side. So this is telling us that the next 5 rounds, which we've already started the first of the round, you're going to work 5 of this dark gray yarn, and then you're going to work 8 of the light gray, then 6 again with the dark gray, and then 8 again with the light, and then come back and finish with 6 or 7 rounds. And then you're going to finish that off of the stockinette. So now that you've established one row of your new color, just take the tail of that new color and lay it in as we've done before with the other one, and just continue working your rounds. You now know how to change the colors, and you just need to work the stripes how you want them, or the solid. All right, we'll see you in a little bit. Okay, so your knitting should measure approximately 9.5 inches from the cast on edge. I know that it is tight and it's harder to measure on this one, so what you do is you tug on your knitting to pull it all the way down and make sure that tension is eased a little bit, and flip up your brim. Now, don't worry about measuring where these little posts are. You want to kind of measure from here to here, but you really only need to measure the part that's flipped up, because from the bottom of this to the top of this part right here is approximately 6 inches, and so you just need to add 6 inches to whatever you measure that's touches here to here. So that should measure about 9.5 if you followed the pattern with this particular yarn. If you have another yarn, of course, the rounds may not be the same, but it's about 33 to 34 rounds. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to cast off. You're going to measure around your loom and cut about 12 inches, and we're going to be using that with the darning needle or tapestry needle, and we're going to be going through these loops. But first, what you do is you take the inner loops like this and move them to the outer pegs. So lift them up and move them over to the front. So all loops on the back go to the front, okay, from the inside to the outside, and then you're going to knit over like that. Just knit it over. And then you will just work with your darning needle to go through all of the loops on the outside of the loom and cinch it up and do a drawstring bind off. And that's really it, and you just sew it in. If you have enough yarn, you can go through those twice so that when you pull it, it's going to be nice and strong. Now, it does have a bulkier top. I'm going to show you a bit of a different way. This is not one that the knitting board is showing, but I think it gives you a nice amount, because this is 52 pegs. We're going to take it down to half that amount. We're going to have it at 26 pegs, so, or 26 stitches, and it will help have a smaller hole that you have to deal with, and it won't be as bulky and hard to sew through to make sure that's secure. So what we're going to do in this case is we've got plenty of yarn left. We need to have enough left for about 2 rounds going around, and you need to if you want to do this and you don't have quite enough yarn, you can go backward 2 rounds and just kind of undo those stitches and then have enough, because it's going to cause a little bit of a lengthening in our hat, and that's perfectly fine. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the second loops and move them on to the first loops. So that's on the outer and on the inner loom. So just take those off and move them over. Now I'm going over here, and I'm going to take the second, or it's actually the 4th peg loop, and I'm moving it to the 3rd. So every other one is moving on top of the one next to it. Okay? So go ahead and do that. Pause your video and come back, and I'll show you how to wrap it. Okay, so now you've got doubled up pegs on every other one, front and back. So this is called a decrease in double knitting, and you're just where you move the pairs over on top of the other pair. And so now when we wrap our row, we'll be working 2 pegs over one, and then that will effectively decrease those stitches, and then we'll work another round. So we do a decrease round, and then we just work that same round again without moving stitches, just establishing that same pattern. So this is the pattern you're going to work twice in a row here. So we're going to go down. You should have your yarn coming from the second to the last peg in the inner loom. We're going to go to the outer loom here on that first peg, and then we're going to we're skipping the one behind, and we're going to the 3rd peg. Okay, so we go to the 3rd peg, we're going to skip the one in the front. Now I want you to just completely ignore anything that doesn't have anything on it. So we've got something on the 1st peg, and then the next one is being skipped. Okay, and then we want to go down to the this one, which is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th peg. Okay, notice how there's 3 pegs in between the one we wrapped and the one we just wrapped. So the one previous and then the one we just did here. Then we're going to go up. Let's just visually just skip 3. So 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to come back here. And see, when we come up to the front again, we're going to skip 3. 1, 2, 3. See how that works? So we're just skipping 3, and that's the easier way to do it rather than counting or figuring out the numbers as far as like which peg number it is. So we're just skipping 3 pegs in between the ones we wrapped. So going back and forth, alternating, it's just going to have a nice zigzag, and do that all the way around the loom. In my head, I sit there and say 3, 3, 3, and 3, just so I keep on the same rhythm. Okay, so go ahead and do that. Pause your video and come back when you're ready. Okay, so I'm at the front now, or I'm at the beginning of my round, and I need to go a second pass around. This is where you have to be very strategic about where you put it. So I want you to think in your head, last, first. So I'm going to the last peg in the back. That's where it naturally pops to. And then I'm going to go to the last peg in the front. Okay? So last, and then we're going to go to first, which is the first peg on the inner loom here. And you can see how the first peg on the outer loom is already wrapped. So now we're just going to go through picking up the stitches, going every other one. So you're not really counting now unless you want to, but you can see where you're matching the zigzag of the next stitch. So just back and forth, wrap those, pause your video if you need to, and then we'll knit these over. So I've come to the end here, and my last one is actually the 4th one from the end on the inner loom. And then I'm just going to hold this down and knit over. Okay, we're knitting 2 over 1. You can do 1 stitch at a time if that's easier, especially because it might be a little bit tight. Let's just do that. Okay. All right, now that's locked in and secure, and you can go ahead and work over all of your stitches 2 over 1. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the outside one first, and that is, oops, no, I didn't get this one here. That's the one I want. Okay, and then I want to I work again the outside of the loom first just for consistency, and then do the inside pegs because it's the tension is much better when you are consistent about doing outside first versus inside or vice versa. So it'll be consistent on the outside of your actual hat. Okay, and so after you're done with that, I want you to do one more round of that same wrapping and then meet me back up and we will actually cast this off together. All right, so I actually ended up having enough yarn to do one more round, so I did a decrease round and then 2 more rounds of the just establishing that pattern, which is good because I was actually short a little bit on the gray, and instead of the 6 or 7 rounds at the end, I did 5. So whatever works for you, but because these we had to cut them out, I'm limited on getting all of that color in here. And of course I could have changed colors and made it longer, but that's totally fine. So now we're ready to actually cast off. So just as I explained earlier in the video, we're just going to pick up this back stitch off the inner loop or inner loom and put that loop on the outer loom. So just simply picking all of them up, I don't need that anymore, and placing them on the front, and then you can knit them over, and then we're just going to go through one by one, go through these stitches. So I would go ahead and move all the loops from the inside to the outside and knit them over, and then the next step is to put them on your tapestry needle or darning needle, and then you take them directly off of the loom, especially if you've only got 12 inches of tail because it's very short. You definitely want to take them off as you're doing it. This particular one, the first one, you could leave on here. I always like to go back through the first one more time. It just, I really like that. And if you can go through them twice, if you have enough yarn and you can go through all of the loops twice, then it gets really secure. So I'm going to go around and I'll show you cinching it together and what it looks like going through there twice. See you in a minute. I'm just going through 2 times around these loops because I have enough yarn. You can see I've already pulled off the loom, all of these loops, and you can see how it's kind of elongating, pulling these stitches. So it's easy just to grab my pick and lift that stitch up and then pull through. So just pull that up and pull on through. And I'll show you what it looks like when I take it off the loom. All right, so I'm going to pull this off of the loom. I've gone through twice. And just start cinching this in. And remember, it's trying to go around all these stitches twice, so there's a lot of loose yarn in here. Just be gentle with it. All right, so that actually, I know this seems bulky, but it's actually significantly reduced. Oh, yeah, my little tail sticking out. It's significantly reduced from where it would be, and it's much easier to cinch these in here. So you can just put your needle back through here now, and then weave in your tail. So, see, we've already gone through the whole thing twice, so really the tail's in there really well. And it's just a matter of going through a few stitches and leaving a loop and going through that loop again before you pull it through. And then do it again. I like to do it again a few more times. And I've gotten caught. There we go. I'll do it one more time just to make sure it's nice and secure. And because this is for cold climates, it's extra double thick, and you can go in between some of these layers and then split the yarn there for that last part of the tail where you're going to cut it. And then this little tail shouldn't pop out. Okay, so that is the bind off or cast off. You can also see a little color pop from the way this yarn behaves. This is one of my tails for when I did color changing, so I'm going to go ahead and cut that, and then when I pull it, it should just pop right back in. So that's what that looks like. And then let's go ahead and finish off this edge here. This is the part where we need our crochet hook. All right, let's bind off stitches at the brim and remove this anchor yarn. So I've got my beginning tail and this loop, and you can see the anchor yarn, this tan colored yarn or beige. You want to ignore that one and just go straight over to the next stitch. It doesn't matter which direction you're going. Just go to the next one that's going around this anchor yarn. So don't skip any. Just kind of pull on the anchor yarn and you can see it. So I pulled this one and found this one. And then we're going to go to the next one. Make sure that you're not going through the anchor yarn at all, not catching it, because you'll have trouble later. So once you have 2 on your hook, you're just going to pull one through the other, leaving one loop on your hook, and then go to the next one. Okay? So if they're pulled a little bit, you can take this anchor yarn and kind of pull up and find it. Just make sure and approach it from the same side. Okay? We go to the next one. Okay, and so as soon as you make several of them, you can kind of look at your work, and it looks like a little chain stitch. So you just get these little V-shaped chain stitches, and then we're going to be working into this first one. I'll show you again later on, but we're going to go through those to finish off this ending or this tail. So continue going all the way around, and meet me back up when you're ready to complete it. See you in a moment. Okay, so coming to the end, I've got my last 2 loops. The very, very last one is the one that has the tail coming from it. Just go ahead and loop that on through. And now we're going to slip the rest of it and get this tail through, but we need to take off the anchor yarn first. So go ahead and cut that, pull it on through. And until this is taken off, it's not stretchy on the edge. This that anchor yarn is pretty stiff. You can see it's now nice and stretchy. Okay, so if you go to the very beginning here, this is the part I was talking about before, go to that very first chain. You're going to go through both edges of the chain, 1, 2, okay, or both loops, and then yarn over with your tail. This is the tail of my hand, and pull through that loop, and then also pull through your very last loop, and it is now connected, and we're just going to just pull it all the way through. Okay, so the tail is through, and now we're just going to turn it on the inside for a little bit, and we're going to sew this last part in. Go ahead and get your tapestry needle, and you're just gonna I'm gonna go in the so my yarn had come from this direction, so I'm gonna go in the opposite direction to kind of cinch that in, and through these 2 loops on the inside, this little stitch that's going right here. Okay, and then I'm going to come back over this direction just to further get it in. So there is a V-shaped stitch. If you can't see it, I'm going right up through the side of it and through the middle. Okay, so now I'm going to do a little trick where I go up the side of the V-shaped stitches, these side stitches. So I go through the outside of it to the middle of the inside, and then I whip my needle around and do that again on the next stitch up, and then continue going up just in this little spiral or swirly motion. And what this does is it hides the tail in here, and the hat remains nice and stretchy. And just go ahead and pull that tail right on up, okay? And then you can jog over to the next one, over to the other side, and turn around and start doing the same thing. Just whipping right around those stitches, and then pull through, and then just cut your tail. And you are done. By the way, a little bonus, I actually created a double knit hat that you saw and a single knit hat. So both the brims are made exactly the same, but I worked the stockinette that's made for single knitting on this one using a double knitting loom. And so you're going around every single peg as you go in one pass. And then when you work the double knit over here, you're skipping every other one and then making a second pass around and working that. So that's the only difference. But what it does is it makes a much bigger, stretchier hat in the single knit, and it's not as warm as this one. This one's for very cold climates, and it's going to be kind of pushed in a little bit more snug and tight. So if you want something that has a little bit more airiness or volume, it's not quite as thick but the same look, you can totally do that with this stitch. If you need a bigger double knit version of this, remember there is the topper. So that's a nice little bonus minute for you. I hope you enjoyed making your double knit stockinette hat today. Be sure and say thank you to KB Looms down below for sponsoring this video, and tell us what you think of your rotating double knit loom. Thanks for joining us today, where we help you stitch your love and love your stitches. See you again soon.